Jackson Kane stirred awake, his head pounding as his vision adjusted to the dim lights of the escape pod's interior. The hum of the life support system was the only sound around him, a sound that reminded him he was alone and very far from Earth. As he came to his senses, memories of his last meeting with Earth Command sharpened. They promised him glory and redemption, but Kane knew the truth. This wasn't a rescue mission, it was a sentence. His last assignment had ended badly. He'd uncovered secrets information Earth Command wanted buried. Instead of following orders to quietly retire, Kane had pushed back, asking questions they didn't want to answer. Now, he understood that volunteering for this mission was never really his choice. Proxima 3, a dense, inhospitable jungle planet orbiting a far-off sun, was his final destination. With a mechanical hiss, the pod's door slid open, allowing the humid, almost stifling heat to flood inside. Kane's hand instinctively went to his weapon as he scanned the outside. The canopy was so thick that even the glaring light of Proxima's twin sun struggled to pierce through. Towering alien trees stretched in every direction, their bark resembling tightly coiled ropes and their branches thick with curling, vine-like tendrils. Strange, luminous insects buzzed around him, casting brief glows in the gloom. "Welcome to paradise," he muttered to himself, stepping out onto the planet's surface. He activated his visor, scanning the area. Oxygen levels were higher than Earth's, but the air was thick with foreign pollen, spores, and who knew what else. His visor's readouts picked up life forms, but the readings were erratic, as though the planet itself was alive and moving. Every rustle and creak around him hinted at unseen creatures, all likely adapted to their harsh environment and possibly hostile. Kane took a deep breath, steadied himself, and moved forward. Survival training kicked in as he focused on finding shelter and assessing his limited supplies. He was equipped with a basic medkit, a blaster, a blade, a few rations, and a comm device. The comm had no signal, just a static hiss. Earth Command had assured him he could signal them when he was ready, but they hadn't been clear on how. The truth dawned on him, they never intended for him to signal back. The jungle was more than just dense, it was impenetrable. The plants seemed to resist his every step, vines tightening like living things as he tried to cut his way through. Hours passed, each one dragging longer than the last. His instincts told him he was being watched, though each time he turned, nothing but twisted branches and looming shadows met his gaze. Finally, he stumbled upon a small clearing near a trickling stream. He set down his pack, using his blade to clear some space and assemble a crude shelter from branches and leaves. As he worked, his mind wandered back to the Earth Command briefing. They'd called Proxima 3 uninhabited, a prime candidate for terraforming if it wasn't so hostile. But Kane was beginning to doubt that assessment. This place was alive in a way that felt unnatural, even malevolent, and he couldn't shake the sensation that someone or something was watching. As darkness descended, the jungle came alive in new ways. Glowing plants opened like flowers, casting an eerie light across the trees, and creatures scurried around, their calls echoing into the night. Kane finished setting up a small perimeter around his camp, placing motion sensors to alert him to anything large approaching. Exhausted, he settled down, hoping for a few hours of rest. But as he closed his eyes, he heard it, faint whispers, barely audible yet unmistakable, drifting from somewhere in the trees. It was a language soft, melodic, and entirely alien. His hand went to his blaster, his pulse quickening as he scanned the darkness. The whispers grew closer, accompanied by light footsteps that barely disturbed the ground. Kane strained his eyes, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there, but the jungle was thick, a maze of shadows. A quick glance at his motion sensors showed no movement, yet the voices were undeniably close. Sweat trickled down his face as he felt the weight of the jungle pressing in on him. Then, as suddenly as they had come, the whispers ceased. Silence settled over the camp, so complete that it made Kane's own heartbeat sound like a drum. He held his breath, waiting for any sign of movement, any hint of what was out there. Nothing. Reluctantly, he allowed himself to relax, though his blaster remained in his hand. He forced himself to close his eyes again, though sleep came in fragments, each broken by the memory of those whispered voices and the feeling of being watched. As dawn broke, Kane was wide awake, feeling more like prey than a man on a mission. He knew now that he wasn't alone on Proxima 3. Whoever had been watching him last night hadn't approached, but they hadn't left either. He could still feel their presence, lingering at the edges of his senses. For the first time since his arrival, a strange thought crossed his mind. Maybe Earth Command hadn't miscalculated. Maybe they'd known all along that he wouldn't be alone out here. Kane woke at dawn, groggy and uneasy. The morning light was muted, casting a greenish glow through the dense canopy overhead. The whispers of the previous night lingered in his mind, their strange, lilting cadence still echoing in his ears. He could still feel eyes on him, even in the daylight, but when he scanned the area, nothing was out of place. After a quick, tasteless breakfast ration, he resumed his trek, pushing deeper into the jungle with a growing sense of urgency. He wanted to put distance between himself and whatever had been lurking near his camp last night. But every step seemed to take him further into the heart of an alien wilderness that felt increasingly alive, even aware. He moved cautiously, his blaster ready. His visor continued to detect erratic life forms moving just out of sight, too fast and nimble to catch a clear reading. Every rustle and shadow set his nerves on edge. But then, he saw a flash of movement ahead, darting between the trees. This time it wasn't just an animal. The figure was humanoid, moving with deliberate grace, slipping between branches as if the jungle were a second skin. Kane froze, watching as the figure slipped out of sight. He waited, barely daring to breathe, as more figures appeared at the edge of his vision, surrounding him in a silent, watchful circle. They were too quick to track, their presence more sensed than seen. He tightened his grip on his blaster, not raising it just yet, but keeping it ready. Then, one of them emerged from the shadows, stepping into full view. She was tall, almost as tall as Kane himself, with skin that seemed to shimmer in shades of green, blue, and gold, blending seamlessly with the jungle around her. Her features were strikingly humanoid angular, with high cheekbones, almond-shaped eyes the color of jade, and lips set in a firm line of caution. Her hair, long and dark, was woven with small, iridescent leaves and bone-like ornaments that swayed as she moved. She wore a garment made from the jungle's materials, wrapped elegantly around her body in a way that left her arms free and revealed lean, powerful muscles. Kane's heart raced as she met his gaze. Her eyes were steady, assessing him with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. She spoke in her native tongue, the words soft and musical, carrying an undercurrent of authority. He couldn't understand her, but he could tell she wasn't issuing a threat, at least, not yet. She gestured to his weapon, a clear signal to lower it. Kane hesitated. He was vastly outnumbered and in their territory, yet he couldn't shake his instinct to be cautious. Still, he sensed he'd gained nothing by hostility. Slowly, he lowered his blaster, keeping it close but making a show of relaxing his posture. The alien woman nodded in approval. A second figure emerged beside her, another warrior with a more imposing build and wearing a headdress crafted from leaves and bone. This one steadied Kane with less patience, his stance tense and guarded, but he didn't move to attack. Instead, he and the woman exchanged a few rapid words. Kane guessed she was a leader among them. She gestured toward a path winding through the jungle, motioning for Kane to follow. He didn't have many options. He could resist and risk a violent confrontation, or he could take the chance and follow her deeper into the unknown. Deciding he had more to learn from cooperation, he nodded and gestured that he would follow. The woman led the way, her movement smooth and almost silent, as if she were one with the jungle itself. Kane followed, flanked by several others who had now revealed themselves warriors like the second alien, each bearing markings painted on their skin and carrying weapons crafted from sharpened bone, stone, and reinforced wood. They moved without speaking, their steps barely stirring the underbrush. As they walked, Kane noticed the intricacy of the jungle around them. The plants seemed to shift and move as they passed, vines retracting as if clearing the way. The air was thick with strange, sweet scents, and bioluminescent fungi glowed faintly along the ground, casting an otherworldly light. He could feel the hum of energy in the air, a presence that was almost tangible, like a pulse within the jungle itself. They traveled for what felt like hours until they reached a sprawling settlement nestled within the canopy. Kane's breath caught as he looked up at the towering trees that had been hollowed and woven with natural bridges. Homes were built into the trees, blending seamlessly with the environment. Hanging lanterns made of glowing plants cast soft light over the village, illuminating the figures of the tribe as they moved gracefully along the interconnected pathways above. The tribe's members looked down at Kane with curiosity, their expressions unreadable. Some wore intricate body markings, others adorned themselves with colorful feathers, shells, and carved stones. They watched in silence as he was led into the heart of the village, where the alien woman stopped and gestured for him to sit on a large, flat stone surrounded by woven mats and cushions made from jungle fibers. She sat across from him, studying him intently. He could feel the weight of her gaze, assessing his every move. She spoke again, her voice softer now, less commanding. Kane tried to reply, fumbling over words, then stopped and took a deep breath. "Thank you for not killing me out there," he said, gesturing to the jungle, then to himself, trying to convey gratitude. She tilted her head, a small smile flickering across her face, as if she understood his meaning. Then she tapped her chest and said, "Kara." "Kane," he replied, placing a hand over his own chest. She repeated his name, her voice giving it a melodic quality he hadn't expected. A low murmur rippled through the gathered crowd, who seemed pleased with this basic exchange. Kane could sense that this moment was more significant than he'd realized. By exchanging names, he felt as though he'd crossed a threshold, however small, into their world. The evening wore on, and Kara motioned for Kane to stay. As the tribe gathered for their nightly rituals, Kara introduced him to their customs in small, careful gestures and words. The language barrier was immense, but Kara used symbols and gestures to help him understand. Through her, he learned that their world was governed by a spirit they called the Great Mother, a force that connected all living things on Proxima 3. They believed that the jungle itself was alive, a powerful, guiding presence that watched over them. Kane was awed by the tribe's reverence for their land and their deep understanding of its ecosystems. They spoke of Proxima 3 as though it were an ancient, wise being with thoughts and emotions. It was a concept so foreign to his earthborn perspective that it left him speechless. Yet, as he watched the way they lived, moving in harmony with the jungle, he began to wonder if there was truth in their beliefs. As night fell, the tribe's chants and songs echoed through the jungle, filling the air with a haunting beauty. Strange, bioluminescent creatures emerged, fluttering around the village like drifting stars. Kane felt an unexpected sense of peace as he watched the scene unfold, forgetting, for a brief moment, that he was a stranger on this alien world. But as the night deepened, a troubling thought crept back into his mind. Earth Command had told him this planet was devoid of intelligent life. Either they hadn't known about the tribe, or they had lied to him. The second possibility was more likely, and it left him with a sick feeling in his stomach. If Earth Command knew about the Luria, what else had they hidden? What did they really intend for him to do here? His thoughts were interrupted as Kane's days with the Luria tribe began to settle into a strange, dreamlike rhythm. Every morning, Kara would arrive at the small hut they'd provided him, a structure built from the living fibers of the jungle itself, woven with expert precision to keep out the elements. Together, they would venture into the heart of Proxima 3's forest, where she would teach him about the Luria's way of life. As the days passed, Kane started to understand why they thrived here, while an outsider like him would have been doomed within days. The Luria were fiercely connected to the Great Mother, the guiding spirit they believed inhabited every living thing on Proxima 3. Through hand signals, crude sketches in the dirt, and a few words he'd learned, Kara explained how the Great Mother bound all life on the planet together. Every plant, animal, and tribe member had a role, a purpose, in the ecosystem, and their respect for this balance was absolute. Where Cain saw a dense jungle full of potential threats, the Lurias saw an interconnected world in perfect harmony. One afternoon, Kara brought him to a clearing where the Luria gathered for a ceremony. At the center was an ancient tree, its massive roots coiled around stones marked with symbols Cain couldn't decipher. The tree's bark was a luminous silver, covered in intricate markings that pulsed with a faint blue glow. Kara gestured to it reverently, her eyes gleaming with awe as she whispered, Garshalu. Great Mother's Heart. Cain watched as the tribe members, young and old, gathered around the tree, placing their hands on its roots, chanting in their melodic language. The ceremony was a mesmerizing display of unity, their voices blending into a seamless harmony that filled the clearing. He could feel something in the airy pulsing energy, a strange warmth that washed over him as if the jungle itself were listening, responding to the tribe's call. The ceremony concluded with Kara placing her hand on Cain's shoulder, guiding him forward. She motioned for him to place his hand on the tree's roots. Cain hesitated, feeling the weight of the ritual. But when he finally laid his hand on the cool, smooth bark, he felt a tingling sensation spread through his fingers, up his arm, and into his chest. For a brief moment, he could almost feel the heartbeat of the jungle itself, a slow, steady pulse, ancient and wise. When he pulled his hand back, Kara's gaze softened, as if he had taken an unspoken step closer to their world. Over the following weeks, Cain continued to learn more about the Luria's ways. He discovered that their survival wasn't due only to their knowledge of the jungle, but also to the strange symbiotic relationship they shared with it. Kara showed him how they harnessed the jungle's resources without ever taking more than they needed, how they used special plants for medicine, created weapons from fallen bones and stones, and could even call upon the creatures of the jungle when threatened. One evening, Kara led him to a secluded area deep in the forest, where a dense tangle of vines blocked the path. She pressed her hand against the vines, murmuring something in her language, and, astonishingly, the vines retracted, revealing a hidden grove filled with bioluminescent plants and shimmering pools of water. "This is the Great Mother's gift to us," Kara said, her voice reverent. She gestured to the glowing pools. "Only we may enter here. These waters, they heal us, strengthen us." She motioned for Cain to follow, and together they stepped into the grove. The pools were unlike anything he had seen on Earth. They emitted a soft blue light, and when he dipped his hand into one, he felt a tingling warmth that spread through his veins. Kara explained that these pools were sacred, granting the Luria resilience against the harsh conditions of the jungle. Cain felt a surge of energy just from touching the water and marveled at the bond the Luria shared with their environment. He'd seen nothing like it in his world, where resources were extracted, stripped, and consumed without regard for balance. As he spent more time with Kara, Cain found himself drawn to her, not just for her striking appearance, but for her wisdom and her deep, spiritual connection to the jungle. She had an aura of strength tempered with kindness, a fierce protector of her people and the Great Mother's world. Her respect for life was evident in everything she did, and Cain began to understand that the Luria weren't just survivors, they were guardians. But his growing sense of peace with the tribe was soon shattered. One afternoon, Cain was resting by a stream when he heard the faint hum of an engine, an unmistakable, unnatural sound in the heart of the jungle. He bolted upright, heart racing as he searched the skies. A shadow appeared above, followed by a sleek, silver craft descending slowly, cutting through the canopy with brutal efficiency. Earth Command's emblem was emblazoned on its side. Cain's stomach twisted. He realized in that moment that Earth Command had likely known all along that he would find the Luria, or that they would find him. His mission wasn't to explore, survive, or even to signal back home. He was here to test whether Proxima 3 was a viable source of resources, regardless of who or what stood in the way. Kara, sensing his alarm, followed his gaze to the ship. Her face hardened, and she called out to the warriors nearby, her voice urgent. The Luria sprang into action, disappearing into the shadows, blending seamlessly with the jungle as they prepared for an unwelcome confrontation. Moments later, the Earth Command team deployed, fully armed and moving with the brutal precision Kane remembered from his time in the military. Leading them was Commander Reed, a man Kane knew too well, a figure who embodied the ruthless ambition of Earth Command. His eyes narrowed as he surveyed the area, clearly unimpressed by the jungle and uninterested in its inhabitants. "Kane," Reed called out, his voice carrying through the trees. "Looks like you've survived longer than we anticipated. Good to see you." His tone was casual, even mocking, as if this were just another mission. Kane clenched his fists, feeling a surge of anger he hadn't expected. He stepped forward, trying to block Reed's view of the Luria, who were watching silently from the shadows. "What are you doing here?" Kane demanded, his voice low. "Back up," Reed said with a smirk. "We've come to bring you home. And to do a little reconnaissance. Command is very interested in what Proxima 3 has to offer." Kane's blood ran cold. "This place isn't just some resource for you to strip, Reed. There are people here. A civilization. They're intelligent and peaceful." Reed shrugged dismissively. "They're primitives, Kane. And primitives don't get a say in these matters." He turned to his soldiers, nodding toward the trees. "Fan out. We're here to evaluate the value of this land and any obstacles that need removing." Kane's voice rose, his anger spilling over. "If you do anything to harm them, I'll fight you myself." Reed's smile faded, replaced by a hard, calculating look. "You've gone native, haven't you, Kane? I thought you'd understand the bigger picture here. Earth needs this, and if these locals stand in the way, they'll be dealt with. We'll start by clearing out that village you've been hiding in." Before Kane could react, a war cry shattered the silence as Kara and the Luria warriors charged from the shadows, wielding their weapons with a primal ferocity. The Earth Command soldiers, taken off guard, scrambled to react. Vines shot out from the trees, wrapping around ankles, pulling weapons from hands, as if the jungle itself were joining the fight. Kane joined the Luria, standing side by side with Kara. In the chaos, he disarmed a soldier and threw him to the ground, his instincts sharpened by the weeks he'd spent surviving with the tribe. He moved like one of them now, agile, attuned to the jungle around him. Kara fought beside him, her movements graceful and lethal, her loyalty to her people evident in every strike. The battle was brutal and brief. With the advantage of surprise and their knowledge of the terrain, the Luria forced the Earth Command team into retreat. Reed, bruised and furious, shouted a warning as he was dragged back to the ship. "This isn't over, Kane. You and these savages will pay for this." As the Earth Command ship lifted off, disappearing into the sky, Kane knew it was only a temporary reprieve. They would be back, with more firepower, more soldiers, and orders to eliminate any obstacles in their path. As the jungle settled around them, Kara turned to Kane, her face lined with concern. She spoke softly, her tone heavy with meaning he could not yet translate, but he understood the message. The fight for Proxima 3 and for the survival of the Luria had only just begun. Kane placed his hand over his heart, then extended it to Kara, a silent vow. Whatever Earth Command threw at them, he would stand with the Luria, as one of them, a protector of the Great Mother's world. The days following the clash with Earth Command were tense. The Luria's victory had been swift and fierce, but Kane knew it was only the beginning. Earth Command would return, and next time, they would come in force. Kane had warned Kara and the tribe, and the Luria had prepared accordingly, setting traps and weaving the jungle's natural defenses into an intricate barrier around their settlement. They were ready to defend their home at all costs. Kane's bond with Kara had deepened in the aftermath of the fight. They worked side by side, communicating in fragments of language, gestures, and looks that spoke more than words. She had shown him the heart of the Luria, taught him to see the jungle not as a threat but as a partner, a living entity that provided and protected as long as it was respected. One night, after a long day of preparations, Kane and Kara sat together by the Great Mother's heart, the ancient tree at the center of the Luria's village. They shared a quiet moment, watching the soft glow of bioluminescent plants spread across the clearing, casting everything in a mystical light. Kara placed a hand over his, her gaze solemn as she spoke in her melodic language. Though Cain couldn't understand every word, he knew she was expressing gratitude for his presence, his loyalty, his willingness to protect her people. As she spoke, a deep sense of purpose settled over him. Cain realized he had finally found a place where he belonged, a people who valued the natural world, who saw life as something to cherish, not exploit. He'd found a home among the Luria, a family in Kara, and a reason to stand and fight. But their peace was shattered when, 3 days later, a fleet of Earth Command ships appeared in the sky. The sky darkened as the ships descended, sleek, silver, and bristling with weaponry. A voice crackled over a speaker, echoing through the jungle, announcing Commander Reed's return. His tone was colder, devoid of the mockery he'd used last time. "Jackson Kane," Reed's voice boomed. "Earth Command has given you one final chance to comply. Surrender yourself and these hostiles. We're authorized to take whatever measures necessary to secure Proxima 3. Kane gritted his teeth, feeling a surge of anger as he looked at the anxious faces of the Luria around him. They'd known this day would come, but it didn't lessen the fear and sorrow etched into their expressions. They weren't warriors, they were guardians of their land, defenders of a life they cherished. Kara touched his arm, meeting his gaze with fierce determination. She nodded toward the village perimeter, where the Luria had set their traps. Kane returned her nod, signaling his agreement. They would stand together, whatever came next. The Luria warriors, armed with bows, spears, and the natural weaponry of the jungle, took their positions in the trees, hidden among the thick vines and branches. Kara climbed up with them, her figure blending into the foliage like a shadow. Kane took his place on the ground, weapon drawn, waiting for the inevitable. Moments later, Earth Command soldiers advanced, their faces hidden behind visors, their movements coordinated and relentless. Reed followed behind them, issuing commands as they moved forward, clearing a path with brute force. Kane watched as the soldiers entered the range of the Luria's traps, and with a signal from Kara, the ambush began. Vines shot down from above, entangling soldiers and dragging them off their feet. Warriors dropped from the trees, striking with swift, silent precision before disappearing back into the shadows. The jungle came alive in their defense, with the Luria using every advantage the terrain offered. Kane fired at the advancing soldiers, moving with the agility and instincts the Luria had taught him. The battle was chaotic and tense. The Earth Command soldiers were well armed and trained, but they struggled to match the Luria's fluid, guerrilla-style tactics. Kane could see Reed growing frustrated, barking orders and urging his soldiers forward, but the jungle seemed to swallow them up, each step deeper into the unknown. Yet, as the battle raged, Kane realized that Earth Command was adapting. They began deploying new weapons, flamethrowers, and explosives, tearing through the jungle with ruthless efficiency. The Luria, who relied on the jungle for cover and support, were suddenly exposed, forced to retreat as their sacred forest burned around them. Kane's heart sank as he watched trees, plants, and animals consumed by the flames. The jungle that had welcomed and sheltered him was being destroyed before his eyes. Kara's anguished cries pierced the air as she saw the devastation, her face etched with fury and grief. She shouted to her people, rallying them to retreat further into the jungle, toward the Great Mother's heart. But Reed wasn't done. He called out to Kane over the din of the battle, his voice laced with contempt. "Jackson Kane. You chose the wrong side," Reed sneered. "You think these savages can save you? You're as much of an obstacle as they are." Kane's blood boiled as he faced Reed, realizing just how far his former commander would go. This was more than a mission to secure resources. For Reed, it was about dominance, about erasing anything that stood against Earth Command's will. As the Luria retreated toward the Great Mother's heart, Kane and Kara remained behind, trying to buy their people time. They fought side by side, each step retreating as the soldiers advanced. But then, Reed raised a weapon Kane hadn't seen before, an energy blaster designed to decimate anything in its path. He aimed it at the ancient tree, his expression cold. "No!" Kane shouted, but it was too late. Reed fired, and a blinding flash filled the clearing. When the light faded, the Great Mother's heart lay in ruins, shattered and scorched. The sacred tree that had stood for centuries, the very heart of the jungle, was gone. Kara's scream echoed through the clearing, filled with raw, unbearable grief. Kane felt a hollow ache in his chest as he watched her fall to her knees, her face contorted in sorrow. He moved to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder, a silent vow to protect what remained. But as the dust settled, something extraordinary happened. The ground beneath them began to tremble, and a deep, resonant hum filled the air. The roots of the Great Mother's heart, though severed, glowed with an intense blue light. The jungle responded, vines and plants reaching out as if alive, a pulsing, furious force rising from the earth itself. Kane felt it, the Great Mother's presence, a power beyond anything he'd ever known. It wasn't just the jungle fighting back, it was the spirit of Proxima 3 itself, an ancient, primal force unleashed in response to the destruction. The jungle surged forward, reclaiming its land, striking at the soldiers with unrelenting fury. Reed and his men stumbled, their expressions shifting from arrogance to fear as they realized they had awakened something far beyond their control. The Luria joined in, their chants growing louder as they called upon the Great Mother's spirit. Kane raised his voice with theirs, feeling a surge of power unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Together, they pushed forward, the jungle itself lending them strength, roots and vines moving as extensions of their will. The Earth Command soldiers retreated in terror, their weapons useless against the relentless, living jungle. Reed, desperate and defiant, turned to fire one last shot at Kane, but a thick vine whipped out, knocking the blaster from his hand. He stumbled back, fear flashing in his eyes as he realized he had lost. "You don't belong here," Kane said, his voice steady, filled with the conviction of the Great Mother's will. "This world isn't yours to take." Reed's face twisted with fury, but he had no choice. His men pulled him back toward the ship, their morale shattered, their arrogance gone. Moments later, the ships lifted off, disappearing into the sky, leaving Proxima 3 scarred but victorious. As the sounds of the engines faded, the jungle fell silent. The Luria gathered around the remnants of the Great Mother's heart, their faces lined with grief and reverence. Kara stood beside Kane, her gaze on the broken roots, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks. But as they watched, new shoots began to emerge from the soil, delicate green tendrils reaching toward the sky. The jungle was healing, slowly but surely, reclaiming what had been lost. Kane felt a swell of hope as he watched the rebirth of the Great Mother's heart. This world had suffered, but it was resilient, and with the Luria to protect it, it would continue to thrive. Kane took Kara's hand, his heart full as he looked around at the tribe he had come to see as family. He had been sent to die on Proxima 3, abandoned by those who should have been his allies. But in this lush, vibrant world, he had found something far greater than he ever could have imagined. Together with Kara and the Luria, Kane vowed to protect Proxima 3 from any who would harm it. He was no longer just an outsider. He was one of them, now a guardian of the Great Mother's world, a protector of the life that pulsed within its depths. And as the jungle began to sing its quiet song of renewal, Kane knew that he had finally, truly come home.